Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ellie Weisenberg. I'm the manager of public programs and residencies here at the Pocantico Center, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to Living Landscapes. The Pocantico Center rests in Lenape-Hoking, unceded land of the native Lenape people. We honor the Lenape, past, present, and future, in gratitude and appreciation for their stewardship of this land for generations. Today, our esteemed speakers will highlight both the geological and environmental history of our area, as well as explain how contemporary landscapes can not only be beautiful, but be used to combat climate change by creating a refuge for pollinators, supporting native plantings, and much more. And today's event will take place in several sections. You can see on the map and program that we provided on your chairs. To kick it off, Kim Fendrich, educator and program coordinator at the Rockefeller State Park Preserve, will first present an overview of the billion-year evolution of the Hudson Valley landscape that continues to shape the region today. Then Signe Nielsen, founding principal of Matthews Nielsen Landscape Architects, will focus on the DR Center, where her firm designed contemporary landscapes to mitigate the negative impacts of climate change using native plants to restore habitat, a rain garden to capture and filter stormwater, and trees for passive shade. And then after that, we'll open it up to a Q&A with Kim and Signe, and we will all head outside to the terrace right behind these doors for a reception. And after that, we'll head out of doors outside of the DR Center for an up-close look at the environmental features introduced in the presentations. Signe will lead us around the DR Center landscape, and then Kim will lead us to points of geologic interest around the Pocantico Center grounds. And now it is my pleasure to welcome both of our speakers. I'll start with Kim Fendrich. Kim Fendrich is the educator and program coordinator at the Rockefeller State Park Preserve. Kim has a passion for connecting people with the land and its complex geologic history. Over the last 10 years, her classroom space has evolved from a collegiate setting to the American Museum of Natural History, and finally to the great outdoors. Kim holds a Master of Science in Geosciences from the University of Arizona. Signe Nielsen, founding principal of Matthews Nielsen Landscape Architects, has been practicing landscape architecture since 1978. She believes in using design as a vehicle for advocacy to promote discourse on social equity and community resilience. A fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects, she is a professor of urban design and landscape architecture at Pratt Institute and holds degrees from Smith College, City College of New York, and Pratt Institute. And now I welcome Kim to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Ellie, and thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm glad to be here. I'm also really excited about the interdisciplinary nature of this program. I think it's really cool to see the confluence of the geo and biospheres in this way. Within the discussion of landscape evolution and climate change, I'll be providing the geologic context for our area and touching upon how that influenced the building of the Rockefeller Estate in preparation for our walking tour to follow. I will cover a brief review of plate tectonics, the formation and subsequent deformation of the bedrock in our area, the landscape here at Pocantico and construction of the estate, glaciation, and finishing with a discussion on climate change. Plate tectonics is the large-scale motion of the plates making up the Earth's lithosphere. The lithosphere, I don't know if you can see that green laser, it comprises of the Earth's crust and the uppermost layer of the mantle. The movement of these plates is made possible by the underlying asthenosphere, which is a sort of semi-solid layer that behaves plastically over time. Plates consist of both continental and oceanic crust, so the plate boundaries do not necessarily correspond to those of the continents. Today, we're located within the North American plate on a region that is tectonically inactive, but that was not always the case. Over the past billion years, the Northeast has been the site of multiple continental collisions, which deformed the bedrock beneath our feet. These plate boundaries are where mountains are formed, where new rock is created and old rock is destroyed, as well as where earthquakes and volcanoes occur. The relative movement of these plates ranges from 0 to 4 inches annually, which is about the rate of growth of your fingernails. So on a human timeline, that doesn't really sound like much. However, over the course of millions or hundreds of millions of years, it's actually quite substantial. As the plates migrate around Earth's surface, periodically they clump together and form a supercontinent. And then, of course, nothing lasts forever. That eventually breaks up and the continents drift apart once again. Our story began over 1 billion years ago when the supercontinent Rodinia was in the making. Present-day New York was located on the tectonically active margin of a landmass called Laurentia, which is essentially ancestral North America. Relative to today, the continent was rotated clockwise 90 degrees and was located south of the equator. Over the course of millions of years, slowly drifting towards us was Amazonia, or present-day South America. Ultimately, it was the collision of these two landmasses that resulted in what geologists refer to as the Grenville orogeny. An orogeny is a term for a mountain building event. This dark green stripe that you see here is sort of a crude representation of the extent of the Grenville mountain range, which essentially spanned across the entire supercontinent. As Amazonia approached, the ocean closed between the two continents. Oceanic crust was subducted beneath the margin of the Laurentian continent, and that slab of subducted crust began to melt. That led to the formation of new igneous rock as magma was intruded into the surrounding layers. It also led to the formation of volcanoes on the surface, which deposited ash and lava onto the sea floor. As the continents collided, a variety of different rock types were subject to metamorphism in the forming mountain belt. This base of this ancient mountain range would later become the bedrock in our area. This is a unit known as the Fordham Gneiss, shown here in this sort of brown color. The Fordham Gneiss is rather complex as it was formed from the metamorphosis of continental rock from both Amazonia and Laurentia, intrusive and extrusive volcanic or igneous rock, as well as sedimentary rock that formed from the erosion of both continents. Aged at 1.1 billion years, the Fordham Gneiss is one of the oldest rock units exposed in North America, so it really is quite special. Fast forward a few 100 million years, towards the end of the Precambrian, Rodinia began to break up. New York was no longer on the edge of a plate, but had become a passive margin within a plate, similar to today. The Iapetus Ocean opened between Laurentia and Amazonia, and Laurentia began to migrate north towards the equator. Up until this point, climate had been relatively stable for a long time, but that was about to change as temperatures decreased globally. Glacial deposits from this time can be found across all continents, indicating widespread glaciation, even in equatorial regions. This significant cooling may be associated with volcanism, as particles of ash and smoke in the atmosphere reflected sunlight, effectively reducing the amount and intensity of solar radiation, and/or a substantial rise in oxygen in the atmosphere that was observed at that time. We know that this rise was associated with the increase of microbial presence in the oceans and their process of photosynthesis. So as the microbe population grew in the oceans, they consumed more carbon dioxide, and as a byproduct of photosynthesis, released more oxygen into the atmosphere. The oxygen in the atmosphere reacted with methane, which broke it down, turning it into carbon dioxide and water. And that seems counterintuitive, right? So we're creating more carbon dioxide. However, the breakdown of methane actually had a much greater effect on climate because methane is a more potent greenhouse gas. So that aided in the cooling. And although the temperature did decrease significantly for a time, this was actually ultimately a good thing for life because the increase in oxygen really allowed for the evolution of oxygen-dependent complex life, and it also contributed to the ozone layer, which protects life from the sun's UV radiation. So now, before I jump to the next time period, I'd like to make a disclaimer. The timescale that I have here, while it is very beautiful and fits very nicely on my slides, the interval here is not to scale. So don't be fooled. This jump of 200 million years doesn't look like much, but when you look at 200 million years at the top of the time scale here, where periods are a little bit more well-resolved, it actually spans this whole entire portion of recent history. So the reason why that is because times that are more recent, or essentially the last 500 million years, are more well-resolved and better delineated. And that's because, for one, we have more evidence of this time period in the geologic record, but also because of the presence and diversification of complex multicellular life. That life in the rock record provides context and distinguishable signatures within the sedimentary rock record. So it's a lot easier for us to divide up those time periods. We also delineate these time periods based on significant events or changes in Earth's history, such as the emergence or disappearance of widespread species in the fossil record. For much of the Precambrian, on the other hand, Earth was sort of relatively barren. The continents were still forming, the atmosphere was forming, and microbial life was just beginning to emerge in the oceans. So that being said, by the time we entered the Cambrian era, about 540 million years ago, North America was located near the equator. And at the time, we were experiencing tropical climates as global temperature increased, and sea level rose substantially, inundating vast areas of the continent. Marine life thrived in these shallow continental seas, and the diversification of multicellular life marked a new era in geologic time. This period was also characterized by the erosion of the Grenville Mountains and by the deposition of massive amounts of carbonate rocks, such as limestone, rich in organic material. At some point during this time, continental plates reversed direction and the Iapetus Ocean began to close. Subduction at the plate boundary led to melting and the formation of a chain of volcanoes offshore known as the Taconic Island Arc, which continued to advance towards the eastern margin of the continent, eventually merging with the continent and severely deforming the Fordham Gneiss once again. The sedimentary rocks deposited offshore were also metamorphosed, resulting in the formation of two other members of the Manhattan Prong that underlies New York City and Westchester. These units are known as the Manhattan Schist and the Inwood Marble. Marble is formed from the metamorphosis of the limestones that were deposited on this shallow carbonate shelf, whereas schist forms from shale that was deposited in deeper waters. Over time, the continents flocked together once again, and the supercontinent of Pangaea was born. And I want to throw in another quick disclaimer here. This is not a comprehensive overview of our history. A lot has happened in our timeline, particularly since the Taconic orogeny. There were two other orogenies, mountain building events, the Acadian and Alleghanian orogenies, that did contribute to the geology in our area. They may have metamorphosed the rock in this area further and may also have contributed to the tilting of strata or rock layers. But for brevity's sake, I'm just going to focus on major events and just leave it at that. Obviously, the history is a little far too complex for me to convey in 30 minutes. So moving on to Pangaea, at its inception during the Carboniferous, plant and animal life was teeming, and it was a great time to be alive. However, later on during the Permian, once this supercontinent had assembled, the configuration of this one giant landmass really affected the ocean currents and weather patterns globally. This led to the creation of vast deserts and drastic seasonal temperature changes on land. Both marine and terrestrial life suffered, and conditions became increasingly dry and hot. This, coupled with the effects of 2 million years of volcanism in Siberia, led to severe climatic changes over a relatively short period of time. This proved too much to withstand for much of life on Earth. And at this time, we experienced what was called the Permian extinction event, or the Great Dying. At this time, about 90% of all species on Earth vanished. And then now, 200 million years ago, again, nothing lasts forever, right? So Pangea begins to break up. Continents separate, the Atlantic Ocean begins to open, and the continents slowly drifted to their present configuration. The breakup of a supercontinent is an extensional process known as rifting. The stretching and thinning of crust occurs at depth, where rocks behave sort of plastically. But at the surface, brittle faults and fractures occur. Where full rifting occurred, the Atlantic Ocean opened. Where only partial rifting occurred, you have basins. So basins form where thinned crust and down-dropped blocks of rock create voids that are then filled in with sedimentary rock. The Newark Basin, on the west side of the river, is one of these failed rifts. Thinner crust also relieves pressure on the underlying mantle. This allows magma to well up towards the surface, where it's injected in between horizontal layers of sedimentary rock. The Palisades sill is one of these such intrusions. It has been revealed over millennia and over millions of years due to erosion. Radiometric dating places this intrusion at about 190 million years ago. It's a really stunning natural wonder, rising at about 540 feet in some places. And this beautiful natural landmark attracts millions of visitors each year. It also happened to catch the attention of none other than Mr. John D. Rockefeller. During the 1890s, quarrying for construction was slowly destroying the Palisades. Fortunately, the New Jersey State Federation of Women's Clubs and the American Scenic and Historic Preservation Society saw the value in conserving this natural wonder. They gained support from the governors Roosevelt and Voorhees of New York and New Jersey, who signed legislation to form the Palisades Interstate Park Commission in 1900. Financial support from the Rockefellers was instrumental in enabling the commission to buy out these quarries and protect the landscape from development and destruction. The view of the Palisades was also part of what inspired Mr. Rockefeller to purchase the land in Pocantico Hills just 7 years earlier. It was around this time that plans for the building of their magnificent home began to take hold. Construction began in 1906, and after multiple setbacks, the home was built and rebuilt and finally completed in 1913. Kijket, Dutch for lookout or high point, overlooks the valley with spectacular views, sitting at about 500 feet in elevation. Mr. Rockefeller had a vision to build the home on top of Kijket Hill, which at the time was a rocky crag and not quite fit for a mansion with a footprint of 60 by 75 feet. So they excavated and leveled the hill, reducing its height by several feet, and then bringing in soil to fill in and smooth over the platform that they had created for the house. Stone for the house and the coach barn was quarried on site, and additional building materials included the Yonkers gneiss, sourced locally, as well as stone from New Jersey and Indiana. And in just a few years' time, these extensive modifications of the landscape to accommodate the Rockefellers' vision was well underway. Rock cuts were made for bridle paths, bridges were erected, and loose stones in the soil and at the surface were used throughout the property for foundations, garden walls, and terraces. The soil in our area is dominated by glacial till, which is rocky and unconsolidated and filled with stones of varying sizes. This abundant rocky debris is a reminder of how this land was shaped by the glaciers. This brings me to the latest stage affecting the topography in our area, which was the glaciation during the Quaternary Ice Age. This ice age began in the Pleistocene about 2.6 million years ago and is technically still ongoing, since we have polar ice sheets that remain frozen. We're currently in an interglacial period characterized by the retreat or melting of glaciers. The last glacial maximum was about 25 to 18,000 years ago, and at the time, global temperatures were estimated to be about 10 degrees colder. In some places, locally, as much as 40 degrees colder. You can see here we are just at the southernmost extent of that ice sheets movement. The evidence of glaciation surrounds us here in Westchester. As the ice slowly made its way down the valley, it rounded mountains into hills, exposing bedrock and smoothing the surface, in some places leaving behind parallel scratches or striations, or gauging out crescent-shaped chunks of the underlying bedrock. These are called chatter marks, and that happens as stones that are trapped in the bottom of the glacier sort of stutter their way over the surface, abrading chunks off. And this photo, it's actually kind of exciting. I found this just up the street here, outside of historic Hudson Valley, one of the pastures across from Stone Barns. The retreating ice sheet also left behind glacial erratics. Boulders like this one were plucked and tumbled along for the ride like a pebble in a slow-moving stream. And the ice in our area was estimated to be about 2,000 feet thick. So that kind of explains how it could transport something of this size. And perhaps the grandest of its accomplishments, the ice sheet carved its characteristic U-shaped valley, which was then filled in by ocean water, making the Hudson River a fjord. This is why we have tides, and it's also one of the things that makes the Hudson Valley so special. It's the southernmost fjord in North America, which is pretty cool. So, getting back to the big picture here, Earth has experienced 5 major ice ages. An ice age is defined as a long interval of time, on the order of millions of years, when global temperatures are relatively cold and large areas of the Earth's surface are covered in continental ice sheets. Within an ice age are cyclical periods of warmer temperatures when glaciers retreat. These are known as interglacials, or colder temperatures when glaciers advance, or glacial periods. Glacials tend to last longer and range from about 70 to 90,000 years, whereas interglacial periods are more short-lived and range from about 10 to 30,000 years. We're currently about 11,000 years into this interglacial period, so essentially we're due for a drop in temperature soon. However, due to human-induced climate change, the onset of glaciation will likely be delayed. That could be a few thousand years, or perhaps tens or even hundreds of thousands of years. It's really hard to say at this time, and it kind of depends on how we respond. So I also love to point out here that naysayers will argue that we're just riding a heating trend in a naturally occurring cycle, right? But despite the fact that global warming and cooling trends occur naturally, as we've seen throughout the presentation, we now understand that human activities, primarily the emissions of greenhouse gases from fossil fuel use, have significantly increased the rate of global warming, and particularly just since the beginning of the industrial era. So that's within a human lifetime. Geologically speaking, that's instantaneous. I mean, it's a very fast rate of change, and that's what worries us. In addition to fossil fuel use, industrial processes, deforestation, and agricultural practices have also increased the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, effectively warming the planet by trapping heat and energy like a blanket and disrupting the balance in Earth system processes. And again, it is true that throughout Earth's history, climate has been influenced by natural phenomena such as volcanism, fluctuations in solar radiation, plate tectonics and ocean currents, as well as changes in Earth's orbital pattern. However, these natural processes driving Earth's long-term climate variability cannot explain the rapid change observed in recent decades. And the biggest problem here is that the natural processes that remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere operate very slowly compared to the processes that are now adding it to the atmosphere. As a result, the planet is on average about 2 degrees warmer than it was in the late 1800s. While temperatures have been rising everywhere, almost, warming has not occurred uniformly over the planet, nor within the United States. For example, temperatures in New York have risen almost 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit since the beginning of the 20th century, as compared to the global average of 2 degrees. Even more concerning is that temperatures in the Arctic are increasing at more than twice the average global rate. The US is expected to continue warming faster than the global average, particularly in the northern and western regions. Here, we're looking at the projected change in annual average temperature for various global warming levels relative to the temperatures recorded in the late 1800s. So just to give you an example here, this kind of worst case scenario, if global temperatures rise 7.2 degrees Fahrenheit, New York can expect to see a rise of about 9 to 11 degrees. We're also observing changes in average annual precipitation. Here you're seeing that percentage change of the present day relative to historic averages in the first half of the 20th century. And what you'll notice is that the north and the east are experiencing increases in precipitation, while the southwest is experiencing a decrease. Projections indicate that these trends are anticipated to continue, and the greater the change in temperature, the greater the change in precipitation. This will likely result in fewer moderate precipitation events, but more frequent extreme precipitation events. This will also have an effect of sort of more moderate or mild seasons or less distinct seasons. And we're already kind of seeing some of those effects on wildlife behavior and ecosystems. Sea level trend is another concerning statistic. The sea levels along New York's coast and in the Hudson River have already risen more than 12 inches since 1900. The global average sea level has risen between 8 and 9 inches since 1880 and is projected to rise between another 1 to 4 feet by the year 2100. Over the next 30 years alone, coastal sea levels in the United States are expected to rise another 11 inches. And you'll note here that sea level rise is not uniform across the US coastlines. The Northeast has experienced some of the highest rates of sea level rise and ocean warming. In the United States, almost 30% of the population lives in a coastal area. That means that sea level rise has the potential to affect a lot of people as it increases the risk of flooding, shoreline erosion, and hazards from storms. In an effort to prepare, FEMA has calculated the risk factor for potential negative impacts of climate change-induced natural hazards across the country. The goal is to help communities develop risk management strategies so that they're able to adapt. This calculation is based on expected annual loss, social vulnerability, and community resilience. Social vulnerability refers to the susceptibility of a group to the adverse effects of natural hazards, and that may include disproportionate death, injury, loss, or disruption of livelihood. Finding solutions that are socially equitable and inclusive is very important here. Community resilience, on the other hand, reduces risk. This is the ability of a community to prepare for these anticipated hazards, to adapt to changing conditions, and to withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. The risk index rating for Westchester County is relatively moderate at 94%, which means essentially 94% of US counties have a lower risk index. Our greatest potential hazards include flooding, hurricanes and strong winds, lightning, extreme temperatures, and episodes of poor air quality. Population density is a huge factor as people and assets are highly concentrated in our area, making us particularly susceptible and vulnerable. It is of the utmost importance that we act now and find ways to adapt. And I don't say that to leave you with a sense of doom and gloom. There are solutions. And collectively, we're in the process of assessing our vulnerability to climate change and developing strategies to increase both infrastructure and community resilience. We cannot stop the warming of Earth's climate, And I don't think that's really the goal here, right? But we can reduce our greenhouse contribution, reduce our contribution to the greenhouse effect in hopes of slowing it down. We can also seek ways to promote carbon sequestration or the removal of carbon from the atmosphere. We can reinforce our shorelines, use renewable energy sources, and implement climate adaptive and regenerative landscaping practices. Thankfully, in recent years, we've seen substantial increases in the magnitude and scope of climate action with innovative approaches. This building, for example, meets the highest standards for sustainability. It's both LEED Platinum and Zero Net Energy certified. And today, we're fortunate to have the opportunity to discuss innovation in the natural landscape with the founding principal of Matthews Nielsen Landscape Architects, Signe Nielsen. So with that, I would love to hand it over to her. Thank you all for listening. I look forward to taking any questions and to exploring the property together later. Thank you.
Welcome. So happy to see all of you here in this beautiful place on this beautiful day. I also want to thank the Rockefeller Brothers Fund for orchestrating and organizing this wonderful event that we're all here to enjoy this afternoon. So now, thank you, Kim. We're going to zoom in, both spatially and from a time perspective, and we're only going to talk about 4 years of time. We're going to speak about the DR Center, David Rockefeller Creative Arts Center, as it's officially called, which opened in the fall of 2022, that, as Kim mentioned, serves as a sustainable and inclusive home for the creative process. It is located in once was the back of house area of this larger Kykuit estate that provided the maintenance support for the overall landscape. The map that you have at your seat shows basically the position of the DR Center in the overall estate footprint. I want to just speak a little bit about this structure specifically. So this was adaptively reused for this project. It was originally designed as an orangerie, which has been around since the 18th century in French estates, and was used to house ornamental fruit trees, particularly orange trees, hence the name, over the winter in colder climates. It was designed in 1908 by William Bosworth, the same architect who designed the main house. And then in 1979, Nelson Rockefeller bequeathed the orangery to the National Trust. When we started the project, this is what we found. It was somewhat forlorn, but had a very romantic sort of incursion of landscape creeping up its facade. The back of house was far less interesting and really just presented this blank wall. I also just want to point out that if you can see, there's a road on the right side, a rather straight road. We were not particularly enamored by the sort of straightness of that and ended up curving it closer into the woodland, which also gave us more landscape in that area, which you'll see in the built configuration. So here we have the after. On the left side, the cleaned up facade and kind of a nod to the history of it being used to house tree planters here in the front. The rear facade, we're going to go out and look at, so I won't delve too much into it, but you see some trees in the foreground. They're actually on the south side of that terrace, so they help contribute additional shade to that trellis area. Now a look at the site plan. So the actual scope of our work for the DR Center is what you see highlighted. And I will zoom in on this more in just a minute. But basically our role was to collaborate with the architects, FX Collaborative, to design this ambitious adaptive reuse project, and really a demonstration of the RBF's mission for sustainable design, accessibility, and inclusion. It's used, in case you didn't know, for performances, artist in residence, educational events such as this, and exhibitions. So the facade was restored to its former glory, and it offers a very welcoming arrival threshold where you can gather before or after an event, and you see the tree planters on either side. Those are planted with carpinus, not orange trees, just to point that out. The rear is really where so much change happened, if you recall that rather dull back facade. And so our charge then was not just to create something beautiful, but something performative. And that is to be separated from the word performance, like a dance performance. A performative landscape is a landscape that does the things that Kim talked about, which is to help heal our disrupted environmental systems in a way that hopefully can put us on a better path in the future. So I'm going to speak mostly about what are the performative aspects of this landscape. But I also want to say that we are landscape architects that think about people a lot too. And so we want, when you come here for a performance or an event like today, to enjoy being indoors, being outdoors, wandering around, being able to sit in the shade or the sun as you choose. And so we have thought very much about creating spaces on the terrace, and you'll see here other spaces on the terrace, some more intimate, some more expansive. And we thought a lot about how this building meets the ground. It is always a challenge to do that. You can provide lots of stairs, you can provide lots of ramps, but here we really tried to bring the building down to just hover over the ground and then have a very gentle set of steps that we will go down and a gentle ramp that can bring you back up. So the entire site and access to this building is fully universal. Here you can sort of see the hovering of the terrace over the paving that you step down onto when you're actually on terra firma. The planting on the right side, which we will see when we go out, all of the plant material used here is all native and native to our area and adapted to our climate, which, as Kim mentioned, is changing. And so we thought about future temperature warming and selected plants that have a heat tolerance, not just the traditional cold tolerance. As you transition away from the terrace, you enter into kind of a meadow, and then you go to the photovoltaic panels. These photovoltaic panels really set a high bar to achieve net zero annual energy usage, which in turn is an important way to try to lower our carbon emissions. And it means that this building uses no electricity and is what is called off the grid. We decided that rather than the kind of typical strategy of the solar array over here and some other landscape solution over here, we were going to combine them into one idea. And so it's a combination of PV panels on top of rain gardens, which is a little bit challenging, but we basically studied the angle of the arrays so that they received the maximum sun that they needed to receive, but also were elevated up off the ground enough so that the plants could actually grow underneath the PV panels. So now zooming in on this particular area, there are 5 arrays of PV panels. There's a sort of a loop path that will go on so you can get sort of up close and personal with the rain garden as well as the panels and the plants. Now, what is a rain garden? The blue areas on this plan represent bowls or depressions. And the green, we sort of highlight, because I know this thing isn't working, I'm just going to go up here. So this is the wettest area, this is the intermediate, and this is the driest. And I'm going to go through some of the plants that are in those 3 typologies. But essentially what a rain garden is this. It is a depression. It is actually calculated. It's not just a random hole that you dig. It's based on the volume of stormwater that you expect to have flowing into this part of the site. So we did a watershed study of the area that includes bringing water down the hill from the greenhouse, as well as from the road that we relocated, and of course the area that's immediately around. And there's a gentle slope. You can see out the window, a gentle slope that comes all the way down and then comes down from the woodland. So we calculated that, that watershed, as it's called, and then figured out how big these rain gardens needed to be. The other thing is, as Kim also talked about, we are going to experience and have already experienced higher than normal rainfall. We've had recently as much as 3 to 4 inches an hour, which is well more than we have ever seen in our area. So the question is, when you're designing a rain garden, for example, what storm do you base it on? What degree of risk are you designing it for? Are you designing it for normal, or are you looking out in time and thinking about how rainfall will increase, as Kim so eloquently pointed out, in the Northeast? So we designed it for not the worst case scenario, but worse than what is presently our rainfall. So then you see the 3 kinds of plant typologies: the hydric, and the hydric are what are called hydrophytes. These are plants that can live in water for a period of time, and actually are capable of surviving without oxygen, because once they are inundated, they do not have access to oxygen. So it is a very particular kind of plant that is classified as a hydrophyte. Mesic, as can you probably tell from its word, is in between. It can take periods of saturation, but shorter periods of saturation. And then the upland is what we would consider to be sort of a normal condition. So my notes are really useless. I'm not even looking at them. I hold them for like a teddy bear. We always create these color charts for our clients and for ourselves. And what they do, and I don't expect you to read anything here, but you get the hydric, mesic, and upland. And we'll look more at the actual species in a minute. But the point is to demonstrate to ourselves and to our clients that we actually have 12 months of interest. Obviously, in the wintertime, we're looking at evergreens to hold that interest. In the fall, we're looking at fall blooming flowers as well as grasses, and also looking at lower kinds of perennials like carex to hold color throughout the year. And even today, I took a quick tour before you came just to make sure there's something to look at. There are, in fact, some, we're at the late summer, early fall, and there is quite a lot of color. The grasses already are beginning to show their fall, and many of the fall blooming plants are in full swing, and some of even the summer ones are still hanging on. So I'm going to bring these 3 sheets of plants with us into the field, if anyone wants to look at them or have me help identify them. But these are the hydric plants. So as you can imagine, based on the conditions that I described, there are not that many plants that are able to withstand the kinds of conditions that we ask these plants to survive. I will also say that, for example, for the past 10 days, I don't believe it's rained. So they're not always standing in water. And that makes for a very challenging plant palette to be able to withstand those extremes on either end, because there is no irrigation here. The mesic plants, there's more variety possible here. And again, it's a combination of grasses and perennials. You may notice, if you read really fast, that there are certain plants that are in both categories. And that makes for sort of a nice transition, because you really don't want to just see, oh, there's the hybrid plants, oh, there are the mesic plants. They do merge as you get to these elevational merging between the hydric and the mesic. And again, you don't really know what kind of a storm is going to fall, so sometimes the rain garden may be completely full, other times it may only be partially full. So the amount of water these plants get is always variable. We did put in a particular kind of soil. It's not draining down into the glacial till that, I mean, eventually it drains down into Kim's glacial till, but before it gets there, it's going through a much more porous aggregate soil, because by health code, you actually cannot have standing water for more than a 24-hour period, obviously for mosquitoes and other health reasons. So it does need to drain well, and glacial till, because of its rock and whatnot, isn't always consistently good for infiltration. And then the upland plants, and again, you'll see some crossover between some of the mesic plants and some of the upland plants. And again, a combination of really trying to not just use natives that are good for habitat, as Ellie talked about, but also that are beautiful. A performative landscape needs to be more than just performing. It also needs to be beautiful, even if you don't know what it's performing. This is it as we will walk. It's just really a very beautiful meadow. You can see that we calibrated the heights of the plants to not exceed the height of the PV panels. Obviously, we don't want to shade them, but they're able to tickle the bottom of them, which is really lovely. And you can see another view. Also, you get a glimpse of the woodland that I'll talk about in a bit. And then this is it in the later fall. So one always wonders, what does a garden look like in the late fall? But I find that the muted colors of the fall can be very beautiful. But this is a good image on the right, essentially of a cross section. So you see how high above the rain garden are the PV panels, and how we were able to tuck plants, except under the very depth of their shadow. And this is the woodland. So we did move the road. We wanted, first of all, as I explained why, but it's also a more graceful curve. But we then were bumping right up against an existing woodland. And so it was a rather severe gradation, if you will, between these tall trees and this kind of meadow. And so we added understory trees in this area so that over time the forest will come down and meet the meadow in a more gradual and graceful way. Now, if I still have time, which I think I do, I just wanted to speak about another project that we recently finished that speaks to very, very similar things as we've done here, and also captures some of the other things that Kim talked about with regard to sea level rise. So I'm only going to speak about the sustainable strategies at Little Island, nothing else. So the first thing we did is to elevate the pier out of harm's way. So it accounts for 3.5 feet of sea level rise and 30 inches of freeboard and through 4 feet of storm surge. So it is 10 feet, fully 10 feet higher than the esplanade that you see on the right side. And during Hurricane Sandy, that esplanade was under 6 feet of water. So it made absolute sense to elevate this pier, and it's the reason why it is not attached to land. And so you access it from these bridges, as they're called. They're not really bridges, but they take you up 10 feet. The other thing we did, there was a lot of concern that this pier, being a square, not a rectangle, was going to cast more shadow onto the marine life in the Hudson River estuary, which is a protected estuary. And so we tipped up the southwest and the southeast corners of the pier so the low angle of the morning and afternoon sun can penetrate deep under the pier, and we were able to prove that we were not creating a worse condition than a low rectangle. In fact, it was actually a better condition. Another thing that was really, since Kim was talking about local rock, I'm going to talk about local, not rock. No, it's some rock. So it turned out, really by more coincidence than anything, that all of the materials and fabricated materials and fabricators all came from New York State. And what you see on the upper left are these things here in pieces. So they were cast in upstate New York. They were barged down the river to another location that assembled them into those shapes, and those were in turn barged down the river and put in place with cranes. The rock that you see in the middle picture came from Champlain stone, and we used specifically something called South Bay quartzite, and then all of the wood in the park is New York State black locust. Again, I will say that unlike the DR Center, Little Island is not exclusively native in its plant material, but we did try to go sort of the extra mile in what is now becoming an interesting area of botanical study, which is intra-species diversity, where you use a number of plants of the same species and try to strengthen their seed pool. We obviously selected all the plants for their tolerance to maritime conditions. We don't get a lot of salt spray since we're way up out of the river, but it is something. We have hugely high winds. That is probably our biggest environmental challenge, but not actually salt. So they're really designed for tolerance to wind as opposed to tolerance to salt. We also did a lot of study on attracting habitat. We have monarchs, and we see them creating their little pupa. We have all wonderful things. We have ducks are now nesting there. We have a resident red-tailed hawk, and a number of birds that, because Little Island is on the migratory flyway, we get a number of bird species in the spring and fall. And then almost lastly, dark sky compliant light fixtures, which we also have here at the DR Center. So the only place there really is light is where you need it, on stairs and paths. And then something else that I think a lot about, as I mentioned before, that we also think about people, is creating places for mental and physical wellness. And there are many, many ways that you can explore Little Island or the DR Center and feel those same senses of wellness. And then lastly, again, back to the DR Center, there are a number of cultural offerings on the pier, where there are 3 performance spaces. And when you're next in New York City, there's a very active programming, as there is here, and you can find it on the Little Island website. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I'll be joining Kim for your questions.
What are all those white things attached to under the water?
Those white cone things, we call them tulips. They are made out of concrete. They do not hold soil. There is a structural slab that connects all of them. There are 248 piles. So the column on which the pot sits is driven down to bedrock. And just because of Kim, I'm going to tell you that the rock of the Hudson River slopes down pretty precipitously. So the piles that are closest to land go down 90 feet to rock, but when they get further west, they go down 220 feet.
Wow.
So that's how fast, in 320 feet, it goes from 90 to 220 of the slope of the rock. So it's a hollow concrete on top of a solid concrete pile driven to bedrock.
I'm going to bring the mic around.
Because we're recording in live stream, so we can hear.
Where exactly is this little island? Who paid for this? And what was
Here,
the
I'm going to check the
origin
whole thing.
of making the show? How did it begin?
Okay, it is located roughly at 14th Street and the Hudson River, just south of Pier 57, just north of Gansevoort Peninsula. It was once the pier that was there before was destroyed in Hurricane Sandy, the Hudson River Park Trust that manages the whole Hudson River Park was kind of out of money and went to a donor and asked whether he would contribute. And after some thought, decided he would do better than that and pay for the whole thing. So it was one single donor paid for the whole thing.
Anonymous.
No, Barry Diller. His name is Barry Diller. And I just want to say, because you saw some of those pictures, and some of you may be plant enthusiasts, as I was designing this, and I was getting more and more encouragement from the donor, I said, you know, this is a very complicated landscape. And you can't just have two mow and blow guys doing this. And he said, okay, Signe, how many gardeners do you want? I said, I want 3. And he gave me 3. So it is full-time maintained by 3 highly experienced, well-trained gardeners.
I probably don't need the mic, but anyhow, the fjord, Hudson River, and the depth which creates the Hudson River Canyon goes out deeper and deeper, combine both of your interests. The fjord, is it the same kind of fjord as up in Canada?
Yeah, so essentially a fjord is just a term for the landscape feature in which a glacially carved valley meets the ocean. So anywhere that you have glaciers that essentially will lead a river to ocean water, that would be considered a fjord.
So it goes all the way up to Albany, or?
The whole waterway would be considered a fjord, essentially, yeah.
But my understanding, and Kim will probably know better than me, is that there is actually tidal action all the way to Albany.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so the tides and the access to the ocean is what makes it a fjord, yeah.
Like Saguenay up in Quebec, the fjord that's up there.
I'm not familiar with it specifically, but yeah, sure.
Hi, thanks. I have a question about the PV panels. And do they have any effect on the wildlife in the meadow?
I am not aware of any. I'm just trying to think what that could be. I would say that if I were a bumblebee, I would probably not land on the PV panel. I'd probably go to where I wanted. Would the bumblebee burn on it? Probably the bumblebee would feel the heat and not land on it. Birds are not landing on it, I know that. But unlike, for example, windmills that are considered a lot more controversial as a alternative energy source, I have not heard any concerns with PV panels and wildlife.
That's interesting, because I'm also curious about, like, say, ground nesting birds or ground nesting insects that are around them, whether or not, you know, there's anything that gets emitted from or heat created by the panels that might affect them.
I think it's all being radiated back. I mean, the sun, it's radiating it back out, not down. So I would not think that that's true.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Just a random question about the sea level rise. Why in some places is the sea level decreasing? Probably obvious, but I'm not thinking of it.
No, it's really not obvious. It's a great question. So I'll give you the example of where you noticed probably on the western coast areas like Alaska specifically, sea level is actually dropping. And that's due in part to the melting of glaciers. So what happens is when you have glacial ice on the land, it's heavy and it depresses the land, the weight of the glaciers. So as glacial ice melts, it reduces that load and the land actually rebounds and rises. So it's maybe not necessarily a matter of the water levels lowering, but the land itself is rising. So that's just one specific example. It's called isostatic rebound. Yeah.
I have a rain garden question. So I'm guessing if you use rain gardens, you do not use Coltex. And if you did use Coltex, are you able to track and document how effective rain gardens are as an alternative to Coltex?
I don't know what Coltex is.
So Coltex are what most of the communities here require you to bury a large plastic bin under the ground to capture the stormwater.
Oh, a cistern.
Again, yeah, as opposed to trying to convince them to use rain gardens instead of cisterns or plastic Coltex. I'm curious if they're collecting any data or if that's something that you could do.
Well, I would say that the advantage of a rain garden, well, first of all, a cistern, a tank, whatever, has a certain capacity. And if the rain exceeds that capacity, then it just bypasses the cistern. And so you're not really doing anything particularly good. You've got whatever it is, 100 gallons stored that you can then use for, you know, flushing your toilets or irrigating your land. It's very reusable water in that sense, but it has a capacity that for which there is no overflow except out. The beauty of a rain garden is, number one, you know, you can oversize them, and it really doesn't matter. It's just a gentle bowl, and if it overflows, it's going to overflow over land. And a rain garden itself, the plants and the soil that they're growing in are designed to filter the water. So in addition to water coming off the road, for example, you're actually filtering the pollutants that are in that on the road, or coming off a lawn that, you know, has some kinds of fertilizers or whatnot in it. So they offer filtration, I would say, is one of their major advantages over a cistern. And second of all, they have they have greater capacity and greater ability to overflow without causing damage. And they provide habitat. So I think you could use all those reasons.
They want actual documentation.
Documentation.
Right, because data, because the law right now is you have to bury the cold tech under the ground, which is probably true for many communities in Westchester County. Whereas it would be lovely to say, I don't want to do that, I want a rain garden. And not be told, well, this is what the law is today.
Well, I think, you know, so I live in New York City, and we are trying to make our city more porous, which, as you can imagine, is somewhat of a challenge. And so we are trying to make something called right-of-way bioswales, which are essentially grand tree pits that allows sidewalk water to get in and then filter the plants. So our Department of Environmental Protection has been looking askance at these right-of-way bioswales, saying, oh, we don't have enough permeable soil, it's not possible, we got too many subways, utilities, what have you. But they're now under a federal consent order to cut down on the amount of water going into our sewer system, because we have combined sewer overflows. So now DEP has decided, well, let's take another look. And so they've actually taken another look and realized that you can get in more bioswales, and they have done all the math. So that could be a convincing argument for Westchester.
Thank you. Can I just ask a quick follow-up question to Liz? When you were saying that when the rain garden was created, you did a certain kind of gravel, or you did something underneath it to help it?
There is a special soil. It's a granular soil, and that's one of the things that you have to kind of demonstrate to DEP. Just going back to the New York City situation, you can't just stick a rain garden on top of any old soil. You have to do an infiltration test or a percolation test. In other words, it records the speed at which water will drain out of that basin. Again, it's for health code reasons as well as other reasons. And they're looking for a minimum of 2 inches an hour. So we did percolation tests here. Not all the areas of the rain garden met the percolation test. So we just installed a depth of this porous material. And the water will go down in there and so it's not just it's sitting on top of the rain garden, but it's also going down into that almost storage volume, if you will, of the granular soil below.
I was wondering about the plants that are under the solar panels. How are they able to get sunlight and water when it's not raining?
Yes, because nobody is actually crawling underneath the panels. When we go out there, we'll see. But the plants are just like right up against. Maybe a few adventurous species have kind of gotten underneath. But yes, they get plenty of
Not under it totally.
Not under it totally.
Ah, okay.
Time for one more. Here.
I just want to say you're a genius. I'm a regular visitor to Little Island Park, and I was there the other night for Marriage of Figaro, and I was telling my friend the storm came up the Hudson River. It was absolutely, the gardening there is incredible, the maintenance is incredible. It's only 7 acres? 9 acres?
It's 2.4 acres.
You feel like you're in a 15-acre park. Each vista is astonishing. Each plant is astonishing. It's only better every time I visit. We watch the storm move up, and then the security people said, there will be no Marriage of Figaro. Run for cover. No question. Just incredible admiration.
That's a great way to wrap up. Well, I just want to say a huge thank you to Kim and Signe for their wonderful presentations. And it's so nice in this beautiful space that we do so much performance and visual arts to shift focus and really look at what's outside these walls and all the beauty and the challenges and the gorgeous landscape. So thank you so much for helping to bring that to everyone's attention. Take a little pause. Please feel free to head outside to the terrace for a reception. We have some food and some things to drink, non-alcoholic. And then build up your sustenance for the walks that we're going to take in a little bit, starting with Signe leading us around the DR Center and